Tough choices ahead for high school seniors applying for college in 2024. This stems from the Supreme Court's decision to end affirmative action in college admissions over the summer. Welcome to the latest word on Black News. I'm your host, Brittany Jones. Now, this practice has played a critical role in preventing racial barriers in higher education for about 45 years. New research shows applications are at an all-time high at historically Black colleges and universities. And listen to this, the National Center for Education Statistics found that enrollment has increased by 7% between 2020 and 2023. But how will they handle the additional increase after the Supreme Court's decision? Wisdom Cole, the national director of the NAACP's Youth and College Division, brings us the latest word on the impact this new guidance could have on Black students and the new challenges facing HBCUs.
Just to kind of kick it off, what are you hearing from HBCUs? We've heard a lot about, obviously how this impacts us at PWIs, but what are you hearing from HBCUs and in terms of how this may actually help kind of bring in students to those universities and colleges?
Yeah, so we are seeing an increase in enrollment at HBCUs, which we love to see. But we have to really make sure that we understand that this affirmative action decision and the impact that it has on HBCUs, particularly recognizing it as valuable as institutions of PWIs, but recognizing that that's not the solution to the end of affirmative action. We want to make sure that young people have a valuable experience, but are able to go to the colleges and universities of their choice. And so, yes, we want to make sure that our HBCUs are fully funded and fully supported and are able to maintain and support the Black students who are attending those HBCUs, but also recognize that students deserve the choice to go to whatever university that they see fit as long as they qualify.
Mhm. And so, talk a little bit more about that wisdom, just the importance of having that choice. Because I went to the University of Florida.
Yeah, I went to the University of California, Santa Cruz, and recognizing that being a part of the 3% of Black students who attended that university, there were certain experiences that I had that were unique to my campus, but also unique to Black students who attend predominantly white institutions. Versus as in my career, I've had the pleasure and opportunity to work with HBCU students across the nation, from Georgia to Ohio to DC to Maryland to Florida to North Carolina, and see the amazing culture that HBCUs have in reverence to our culture. Homecoming culture is like no other in this country. And that is
Mhm.
something that young people should have the opportunity to attend to see themselves be reflected in the study, to see themselves be reflected in the culture, to see themselves be reflected in the staff and teachers and officials who come and attend that university and are speaking to the students, but recognizing that there is an opportunity for students to have access to education at all levels. And so what we
Right.
really are pushing at this moment in time is for universities to commit to diversity no matter what, ensuring that there are no longer testing or institutional applications that are keeping young Black people out of these institutions and halls of power. I believe our HBCUs offer those equitable opportunities and spaces and places for young people to develop their identity, for them to develop their future careers, for them to develop how they want to be the change makers in our world. But it's not fair to our HBCUs to put this burden on them without the proper funding to support them in ensuring that these students receive those resources necessary. You know, uh, a couple years ago, we saw across the nation an outcry from HBCUs demanding better housing. Starting at Howard University, going as far as Spelman and Morehouse, as well as some of our institutions in North Carolina. We saw young people at these HBCUs demand better accommodations. And frankly, when you talk to alumni of HBCU universities, many of them have shared many of the same concerns over the generations of time. And so, if we are going to see this increase, we must make sure that there are the resources necessary to support them in their success. Students must be able to live in a institution that is allowing them access to the internet, access to proper dining facilities, access to housing that is clean and sustainable for them, not just for now, but for years to come. And so as we see that increase, we do want to make sure that we are also seeing the support both on the state and federal level for our HBCUs.
Yeah, so many good points there. And wisdom, what do those solutions look like? Who are we expected to hold accountable to make sure that's done?
Yeah, part of it is recognizing that we have to continue to push the Department of Education, as well as our president, as well as our state and local elected officials to prioritize education for all. Right? We are in a period of
Yeah.
time where we are facing attacks on all front. Everything from our history to our education to our right to vote is under attack. And so it's important that we are pushing our elected leaders to put our communities first, to ensure that our communities are well resources, are well funded, and are being serviced adequately. It is back to school season, and there
Yeah.
are millions of young people who are attending these college campuses for the first time in their life. They're leaving home and going away to these universities to get a better education, to not only better themselves, but to also better their families. And so it's important that these universities actually take the time to listen, to engage, and to equip these students with the resources they need to succeed.
And you mentioned too the strain that it could potentially put onto the HBCUs. Um, when you talk about how that could potentially happen, what does that look like for 2024 for those students who are gearing up to go to college next year?
Yeah, I think in this period of time, particularly for current students, for alumni, for folks who love our HBCUs and are engaged in that system, is to one, make sure that we recognize that these schools must be highly regarded and fully funded as quality choices of schools for students, and not just as schools for students of color forced to attend to discrimination in admission policies. We have to recognize that there is a difference there, that this is not the result of only the affirmative action decision, but the intentional choice of choosing of students to choose themselves. And so part of that work that we have to do as we get ready for the presidential election in 2024 is making sure that we are also supporting our HBCUs, that for those who are alumni, that they are giving back and they are consistently working with students who are attending those universities, are connecting to those alumni networks. Again, I talk about homecoming season being such a powerful moment in time for HBCUs because that is a true culture that is not seen anywhere else. And part of that is making sure that they're using their time, their talents, their tools, and their skills to ensure that HBCU students see all the possibilities that come from being a part of a network like that. I think for
Yeah.
Black students who attend predominantly white institutions, it's ensuring that their universities is not only saying they're committing to diversity no matter what, but actually implementing policy that is going to protect them during the duration of time there at that university.
Wisdom, how do you kind of instill hope still in the youth when they see these things happening in the Supreme Court and thinking, they don't care about us? What are some words of encouragement that you could still say and send a message to them that's saying that, we're fighting for you and there is still some hope?
Regardless of the legislation that is coming down, regardless of the decisions that are coming down, we are the rising majority. We cannot be ignored. We are the culture. And when we put culture and politics together, we have power. And so continuing to walk in our excellence, to show our pride in our culture, consistently making ways for young people to have access. In the state of Florida, when the legislation was pushed down against African American studies, young people have risen up and said, hey, we are going to pass out freedom books. At the NAACP convention, we had a freedom book library that was provided and supported to us from the American Federation of Teachers. Young people in the state of Florida did a bus tour across the state, making sure that young people had access, making sure people were aware of the issues, and making sure that we told our elected leaders that this fight is not going to stop, regardless of the information that you are putting out, regardless of the legislation that you're putting out. And so we have the tools to fight back. And in this moment in time, we have to do everything in our power to ensure that we are well equipped to take on the challenges, because it's not going to stop here. We're still going to be bombarded with legislation in 2024 that is going to be against our best interests. And so it's time to arm ourselves with knowledge.
Just briefly, what have you heard from students in regards to this when you're speaking to them about how they felt about the changes?
Yeah, I have heard that young people have been afraid about what's next. Where do they belong in these universities? Where do they belong in these places and spaces? We're seeing even in Arkansas, right, the discreditation of African American studies for college credit. When it comes to young people transitioning from high school to college, we recognize that when things like this happen, it sets a precedent in terms of what does this look like across the nation. And so it's important for young people to continue fighting forward, to continue applying, to continue recognizing that they have a place and space in the universities, but also working through their networks, working through their systems to ensure that they receive equitable access. And so we have to do everything in place to protect our babies. We have to tell the truth. We have to tell our history. We have to ensure that the education that we are receiving is allowing all of us to ensure that we understand what lies ahead.
There was a lawsuit that came out now against Harvard after the Supreme Court's decision. It's a bunch of grassroots organizations that are saying, you guys accept students who are basically giving priority because of your family, your money, all these different things that allows you to get admittance to the school. What do you think about that? And do you think a lawsuit like this could potentially have an impact on the decision that the Supreme Court has made?
We have to look at it equitably, right? Legacy based admissions is something that is as old as our education system itself, right? The idea
Mhm.
that folks are able to get into universities based on the amount of money, based on their family relationships, based on their relationship with the university. We saw this a few years back where key celebrities were able to pay for ways for their students or their children to get admittance
The
to
SATs.
exactly to the
Hmm.
university. And so we recognize that those things are happening. We have to bear even more weight there in making sure that the folks who actually deserve to be in those places and spaces have access, right? The point of affirmative action in the first place was to protect diversity no matter what, right? When institutions are not looking at our community, are not seeing the value or the intellectual capital that Black people and people of color have in this country, affirmative action was there to ensure that we had a place and space in those institutions of higher education, because those institutions of higher education are pathways to the institution of power, which determines the legislation in this country. And so when we see that affirmative action is being struck down and not legacy-based admissions, we have to wonder, is there a directed or concerted effort to keep us out of the halls of power and to continue seeing legislation like that be put into our ethos year after year after year? And so again, we have to continue to fight. We have to continue to push our universities, but also recognize that we are also consumers of this education and that we have the power to determine the way in which this education moves in this country for our people.
Yeah, and what has the work looked like for you guys since this decision was made? You were already on the front lines fighting against the student loan debt issue, and then this popped up. So, what's the work been like for your team at the NAACP?
Yeah, a lot of the work right now, especially because we are in that back to school season, is making sure that universities are aware of our commitment to diversity no matter what, are examining their systems, are examining what type of professors and staff and faculty are they hiring at the university that is creating an environment that is culturally diverse. What type of recruitment and retention programs are you implementing university to ensure that you are recruiting some of the most exciting and best talent that comes from our community, right? The work is on the states and the universities to put that legwork to ensure that our universities continue to put out a diverse workforce. Because when we have a diverse workforce, we have diverse thought leaders that can solve the most difficult
Right.
problems that we're facing now and tomorrow, right? There are a plethora of issues that are coming down our way that we have no idea about, But the only way that we're able to solve it is by having a diverse workforce that is able to really think through these solutions and ensure that we implement it in a way that doesn't just impact some of our community, but all of our community.
Speaking specifically to now, we have the changes. What do we do next?
In this moment in time, it's very important for all of us to be committed to this fight. Over the next year and a half, a lot of messages, a lot of elected officials, a lot of policy wonks and politicos are going to be coming into our community, telling us a varying degree of messages. What I want us to be clear on is that the NAACP fights for Black people. And we are ensuring that the issues that are most important to the Black community are on the front line. And it's going to take all of our power, all of our culture, all of our energy, not only to keep people accountable, but to also turn out to vote and ensure that the issue priorities that are most important to us are being heard and being actually implemented and things being done about it. No more just talking about those policies, no more just promises, but actual plan and implementation about how you're going to carry it out and execute to support our community's best interest.
Well, Wisdom, thank you so much for joining me to talk about this. I think it's definitely going to have an impact and kind of break down what it is that's happening, because we hear so much of the muddling coming from mainstream media. I mean, I've worked in it, but I want to be able to really highlight the things that are definitely impacting us that people aren't all, talking about.
The Associated Press NORC Center for Public Affairs research poll shows 63% of adults in the U.S. say the court should allow colleges to consider race as a part of the admissions process. Meanwhile, a Pew Research Center survey revealed about half of Americans disapprove of race considerations of an applicant, while a third say they approve. Now, we want to know what you think. Weigh in right here on our YouTube page. First of all, we want to say many thanks to NAACP's Wisdom Cole, and thank you all for joining us on the latest word on Black News. We're looking forward to hearing from you. I'm your host, Brittany Jones. Until next time, take care.